welcome to this week's episode of Hocus Focus, and we're at episode number 6. And I'm Sara Mondaini,
And I'm Thomas Sheridan.
and it's really good to have you back here, and we appreciate you.
Yes, and thank you for all the wonderful comments on the last episode. And it's really makes us feel great and only inspires us to push the envelope even further.
It does, and we've got another cram-packed episode this week for you. Lots of topics and all the usual favourites. So we'll jump straight in with the first subject, and that is Lucifer. And I'll let Thomas introduce him to you.
Yes, the concept of Lucifer is a very interesting one. Most people, when they hear the word Lucifer, think of the fallen angel, or he's synonymous with the devil, Satan, in the Bible. The fact is that Lucifer appears nowhere in the Bible and did not actually get a mention until the King James Bible was written only a few hundred years ago. Prior to that, there was a mention in Hebrew of something called the morning star, and the morning star had fallen. And this was been conflated and twisted and turned around by later Christian theologians to suggest that Lucifer was the brightest angel in heaven who led a rebellion against God, and this rebellion was then smashed. This is actually completely false on every level. Most Jewish scholars will tell you that when mention of Lucifer appears in the Torah, which is the first 6 books of the Bible, what they are referring to is a king of Babylon who had lost his power, and the Babylonian pagan kingdom had worshipped the planet Venus. And therefore, there was a mocking statement that the Venus planet worshippers in Babylon had lost their power and were no longer the big shots they thought they were. They had fallen. This is the very literal translation of it. Now, this goes back a very long time. In fact, into the classical world, there seems to be an interest in the planet Venus in relationship to the morning star, and also representing archetypes of brightness, brilliance, and enlightenment, going back a long way back into Indo-European history. It really comes into the focus in the old Indo-European language root words, and it also appears in Sanskrit, of luke, which means a flash of lightning, a flash of brilliance, a flash of thought, a revelation in the mind. And this led to the veneration, although we don't have much written word, but that means nothing because most of the mythology of the classical world was destroyed by Christians anyway. But we don't have anything other than a mention that Lucifer is the son of Aurora, the goddess, and the brother of Diana, and he's sometimes connected to Apollo. He was known as a Greek god called Phosphorus, and again represents the planet Venus and the morning star. So a combination of all these things brought us up to the King James Bible, where Lucifer was actually inserted as a kind of a devil-type entity, comparable to the Satan or the serpent, the opposer, and so on, to the point now today where people have a very misguided and completely false understanding of who Lucifer was. The only thing we can say for certain is that Lucifer was a pagan god, an Indo-European pagan god, and also a Semitic pagan god, and definitely, well, an archetype in the Semitic sense, and definitely was venerated through the medium of the planet Venus. Now, there's lots of interesting stuff surrounding this. Traditionally, the symbol of Venus is the 5-pointed star, and remarkably, the planet Venus, when it goes around an orbit around the Earth, creates a perfect pentagram in the cosmos. And this wasn't known by the ancient people. Also, the core of an apple contains the seeds of the shape of a pentagram. And this is also synonymous of Eve giving the apple to Adam in the Garden of Eden. The pentagram and Venus and Lucifer are completely synonymous with each other all through history, well, for a very long period. Now, because of this mistake in the King James Bible and the incorporation of Lucifer as the devil or a devil-like being or the fallen angel, an element of esoteric veneration of Lucifer took place, particularly with things like theosophy. and the growth of the Lucius Society and other groups like that, who saw Lucifer as a powerful force standing up against the concept of bullying and dogma of theocracy and rigid belief systems that are pathological. So, for instance, Lucifer's challenging God in heaven, even though he lost, it represented a very important and potent force in mankind, and that is the ability to rationalize, reason, conceptualize things, and consider the possibilities of change. And this is why Lucifer became so central to Freemasonry, and in particular the Anna Lucius, the first day of the world, which is really the first day when man became conscious and moved away from free association and independent thought, the fall. The That's in the esoteric sense, not in the Christian sense. And therefore, so we have a situation today where people think that Lucifer is the devil. He's not. They have very little idea that he's a Roman and a Greco-Roman god, and they have even less idea that he's based on a Babylonian king that had fallen. I think it's in the book of Enoch it's mentioned. And so, but what's remarkable about it is that even though everything about him is wrong, Lucifer has taken on a potent power force of his own, mainly through the Theosophy Society and the Lucius Trust, and the concept of Lucifer representing a new way of thinking, a new way of doing things. And books like Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, he dedicates the book to Lucifer and calls him the ultimate rebel of them all, the way of challenging orthodoxy and beginning again. And that's Lucifer. Lucifer is not the devil and is not evil. In fact, it's quite the opposite. And it represents hope in many ways, the beginning of the new day and the beginning of a new journey after the long night of the dark night of the soul. So that's Lucifer. And a lot of people need to understand that it's a powerful archetype and they should incorporate it more into their lives because it represents the freedom of thought and the freedom of individuality against oppressive and tyrannical, dogmatic tyrants. And that's it. What do you think of that, Sarah?
Yeah, he's also seen as being akin to Prometheus as well, who gifted fire to humanity. And he incurred the wrath of Zeus, whereas Lucifer is said to have incurred the wrath of Jehovah for trying to expose the tyranny of Jehovah. And for that reason, he was is seen in some circles as the one true God of humanity.
And also the concept of Prometheus's crime, quote unquote, humanity as a whole is punished. And the same thing happened with Lucifer, the angel. The concept of all of humanity is damned for turning on God.
Wasn't Prometheus bound to a rock and they set an eagle about to eat his liver so that it would grow back again overnight and be eaten again and again for all eternity?
Horrible, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, nice.
But it's a shame we don't have the mythology intact regarding the Greco-Roman and classical mythology of Lucifer because we have so much regarding his sister Diana, who's a very powerful goddess, and even his mother Aurora, and of course Apollo. And I think actually a lot of the mythology surrounding Apollo probably would be comparable or incorporatable, if such a word exists, into the Luciferian story. So we can get there's a lot of very similar ideas there. A lot of Freemasonic lodges who actively open in the past worship Lucifer, they now will worship Apollo as a kind of a substitute for this like loaded word, but they'll apply the attributes and archetypes of Lucifer onto Apollo because they are kind of similar. But the thing is that the brightest star in the sky rises in the morning. Now, there's some interesting stuff in the Bible about that they compare Jesus and Lucifer both being the morning star. And so, therefore, you have other things. Now, there's a lot of kind of nonsense regarding that stuff because people then think, oh, Jesus and Lucifer are the same thing. They're not really. They're not at all. It's just the Bible is full of those kinds of strange contradictions because of all the source material being from all over and then being converted into English and other languages and Latin. There's been so much loss in it. But there's absolutely no mention of Lucifer at all in the Bible. And you tell that to the average person, and they're in shock.
He's an archetype to draw upon in times of when you need truth and clarity of a situation, or the strength to break free from some kind of tyrannical situation or something that you feel chained to. And he's, for me, he's like what you said, he represents that flash of clarity that you get when all of a sudden you see everything around you clearly for what it truly is. And I think that's why the profane constantly go on about the world being under some kind of Luciferian agenda, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Because
No, we'd be better off if that was the case.
yeah, we wouldn't be in the chains we're in at the moment if it was everything was Luciferian, you know. So it's the Abrahamic thinking that puts those chains on people through that dogmatic thinking and inverting the knowledge and truth to make people afraid and question it because they're faced with the fear of burning in hell for all eternity. So that's
Yeah, when I hear
people.
them calling people like Klaus Schwab and the WEF and all those people, the globalists, Luciferians, I have to laugh because that's the last thing they are. They're closer to Abrahamics. If they're, if they were Luciferians, they'd leave us alone. They actually wouldn't bother us, and that's why the only people that are really Luciferians on this world are the tribes and people like us who are like, no, I'm not putting up with your system. I'm not putting up with it, and I don't want that. I'm going with my feelings, and what you're telling me is wrong. Where an Abrahamic thing is that I don't go with my feelings; I just follow the commandments, and that's all the globalists are about: commandments, laws, rules, and regulations, tyrannical oppression. Well, Lucifer stood in the face of that, both well in the biblical sense. And that's why I find amazing that so many Christians can't see that. They're blinded by. I mean, you have Christian sects such as the Cathars and to an extent the Bogomils, who were more Neoplatonists, who saw Lucifer as they saw the God of the old Bible of the Old Testament as a demon, and their version of Christ is much closer to the Luciferian idea that he came to this earth to expose the psychopathic demon called Jehovah, who's trying to pretend it's God.
And his name, like you say, represents light bringer. And in some circles, he's referred to as an angel of darkness. But that could also mean that he's so bright, he can penetrate the darkest realms and guide these hopeless souls into the light. So, an angel of darkness could be somebody who shines a light into those dark corners, which is
And
what.
up until about 100 years ago, there was very little mention of things like Satan and Lucifer. Satanic just meant someone who didn't go to church. That's all it meant. They opposed the religion. Well, it didn't mean anyone who was involved in Satanism or devil worship or anything. They just simply didn't go. And you'd have many products called Lucifer, anything to do with matches or lights or oil. And so many products were called Lucifer products that they could actually generate light, batteries, everything, and flashlights, friction matches. So many things were called Lucifers. They gave light to the darkness. It's only in the last 120, 30 years, mainly through the growth of evangelical Christianity in America, that all this has become suddenly taboo.
He's represented in the tarot as well, isn't he? In the Rider Waite tarot, is he the lightning that hits the tower on the tower card, and the little boy who's sat on the horse on the sun card? Have I got that right?
Yeah, that's one of what's his name's descriptions of it, and also the star in the star card, because that comes at the end of the Dark Night of the Soul, and the Aqua Nostra, the new possibilities are now opened up as the star appears in the heavens. Interesting, in the Rider Waite deck, it's a Babylonian star in the sky, so it brings it all back home again, where it came from in Babylon. And that's very interesting also about the god of Judea mocking the Babylonian pagans. Happens a lot in the Torah in the Old Testament. That you compare it to a star, the morning star. Now, which just goes to show you just how common Venus Lucifer worship was. The worship of that bright object in the morning was all over the Western world. It was extremely common, and it makes perfect sense when you think about it. I mean, it's absolutely dazzling how bright Venus can be on some parts, sometimes of the year, and so on. So why wouldn't it have become an object of veneration? It's surprising to me that there isn't a day of the week named after him. But yeah, Lucifer is like somebody that it's a shame that people don't pay attention to it, because Their lives and the world would be a better place if they understood the true nature of both his esoteric and his pagan archetype.
And I think that's where a lot of the truth movement falls down, isn't it? They wake up to certain truths and then they get caught up again in the lie that is Lucifer being the devil.
Yeah, well, they get caught up in the Bible stuff. They
Yeah.
don't have because a lot of them don't have any education really, and they just hear it's like the whole thing. They've seen a movie like The Omen, and they think that's about the Bible, and they don't have these videos capture them online. They're often made for people who don't even know what they're talking about either, and so it's a self perpetuating spiral of ignorance, and they end up going on about in fact, here's something to you. Here's something for you, truthers, you need to be wary of. By you constantly attacking Lucifer, you may actually be pushing yourself further into the darkness for obvious reasons. Think about that one, because he represents the dark. He represents the rebellion against the darkness of tyranny, and here you are trying to escape tyranny by saying that the light bringer, is the problem. When in reality, it's not that. It's the solution. Do you not think that could be a psyop there? Think about these things carefully.
Yeah.
Words have power. Words are spells, and so do meanings attached to words have spells. And it's like when you call them the elites, they're not the elites. You've already put them on a pedestal or leadership. You have to learn how to use language in such a way that it actually empowers you rather than reinforces your enslavement. And when you're talking about rising up against the globalists and you're calling them Luciferians, what you're actually doing is bonding yourself deeper into your own slavery of dogma.
And darkness.
Yeah.
Many great thinkers over the years have covertly followed the old Luciferian ways, and the most famous one to my knowledge was Leonardo da Vinci, who encrypted the symbols of his heretical beliefs into his work, and they were only visible to those who had the key and the knowledge.
There was also Rudolf Steiner and Alice Bailey.
A drone has captured strange footage of a mysterious shape in a UK wood where multiple walkers have claimed to have been haunted by ghosts and black-eyed children. The image was taken in Cannock Chase, Staffordshire, where people have been reporting sightings of a black-eyed girl since the 1980s. Professional ghost hunters have now said the footage could be proof of supernatural activity in the area. They said Cannock Chase is considered one of the most haunted places in Britain, so it's no surprise the area draws in lots of rumours about beasts and ghouls. Is this a capture of supernatural activity? It has been suggested that the ghost could be the victim of a local murderer, Raymond Morris, who's killed 3 children in the area between 1965 and 1967. This new footage has led professional ghost hunters to declare the area officially haunted. Now we come to our folk horror review, and this week we're going to be reviewing the 1973 horror The Legend of Hell House, starring Roddy McDowall and Clive Reville. And the film starts with an elderly millionaire named Rudolph Deutsch, who's played by Roland Culver, and he's obsessed with discovering the truth about the afterlife. So he hires Dr. Lionel Barrett, who's played by Clive Reville, and he's a physicist and a skeptic, and he's sent to investigate what's known as the Mount Everest of haunted houses, the Belasco House, where 27 guests had inexplicably died in 1927, along with a team of paranormal investigators that were sent there in the early 50s. The house was owned by a sadistic millionaire, and the house is haunted by the victims of his sadistic desires at the house. So the physicist Barrett and his wife Anne, who's played by Gail Honeycutt, have only 1 week to prove or disprove this fact for Deutsch, and thus earn their £10,000. With Barrett representing the scientific side of things, Deutsch also hires 2 psychic mediums, one called Florence Tanner, played by Pamela Franklin, who's a mental medium, and one called Ben Fisher, who's played by Roddy McDowall, and he's a physical medium to communicate with the supernatural side of things. The scientist is skeptical and believes that the 2 mediums are causing any phenomena on purpose through redirected electromagnetic energy. And the physicist, Dr. Barrett, has a machine to rid the house of any excess electromagnetic radiation and clear the house. However, the entity that lives in the house has already taken steps to prevent the house from being cleansed and has no intention of leaving the house and has no intention or desire to cross over properly. Now, Roddy McDowall is brilliant in the role of the multi-faced medium Fisher. He starts off really timid, like a victim, and it's revealed that he's the only survivor from the last time this hell house was investigated. And he soon becomes the most rational and capable member of the team. And he's the only one capable of standing up against the roaring giant that is whatever is left of the previous owner, Emmerich Belasco. There's a lot of atmosphere, a lot of fog, a lot of poltergeist activity, and full-blown attacks from invisible ghosts and possessed black cats. It's perfect for watching late at night. The interior saturated deep red colours against the dull exterior backdrop of this sinister house shrouded in fog give it that perfect 1970s horror feel, and I really enjoyed it. What did you think?
Yes, I've been impressed with this film since I saw it as a kid. It's also a very different looking film. There's lots of a sense of claustrophobia where the cameras are on the ground looking up at the actors, whereas they get more intense during the film. There's close-up shots of the actors talking to each other, and their faces are practically touching. There's Hitchcockian type shots where they would show like Miss Tanner in the foreground and the others in the background in focus. So it has a lot of visual effects. It plays on a big kind of Freudian aspect too, like these kind of best haunted house stories do, that the house also represents the subconscious mind of everyone in it. You know, and all people in general, like the lower floor of the house where the church is, the chapel, it was kind of a satanic chapel, is you know, the lower poles of cognition down there below, the subconscious. The ground floor is where they try to rationalize things, and the upper floors, the bedrooms, is where the ego and the sort of the more sort of sexual aspects come into play. And it's very clever in that way, very clever. And the concept of Belasco being a kind of a survivor in the bricks of his house is very much the story. The physicist, who's also a parapsychologist and has been offered £100,000 to prove, which would have been a colossal amount of money in 1973, that there was life after death, is convinced there isn't. It's just merely a psychic energy that's been a kind of psychometric blast into the wall of the building, and it can be cleared by technological electronic means. Roddy McDowall, who had been there when he was much younger, was very aware of what he was dealing with and the nature of the sadistic nature of the phantom or the entity or whatever it is. They all have their problems too. You see that there's a one point you find out that there's no sexual relationship between a physicist and his wife, and the entity plays on her sexual frustration by showing her phantoms of orgies and things like this and spellbinding her. And the film gets closer and more claustrophobic and darker and denser as it goes. And it came out in a year that was very good for horror films, 1973. We also had The Wicker Man that year. We had The Exorcist, and we had To the Devil a Daughter that year. And the last, I think it's the last Hammer film, one of the last, well, Christopher Lee in that part, and with Natasha Kinski. So it was very good movies in 73, lots of them. And that's just only like 3 or 4 I mentioned. So it was a banner year for horror. They were definitely up the ante. It was not like a Hammer film. It was actually made by 20th Century Fox. So it doesn't have that Hammer vibe. It's a bit more psychological than Hammer films tend to be. And it's genuinely frightening in parts, genuinely scary in parts. particularly the poltergeist scene where the dinner table basically goes insane. That was a very intense part, and also was very disturbing parts where the girl basically allows herself to be raped by the ghost of Belasco. And that was like that must have been very, it would be very controversial now. I can only imagine what it was like back then. But yeah, the Legend of Hell House is a stylish movie, but not in a kind of a sexy hammer way, more in a kind of a cold, dark, but very engaging way. You can't stop watching it, and it is a masterpiece. It is a classic, and there was top level acting by everyone involved. Even Roddy McDowell, who tends to be can sometimes be a bit OTT, was probably right for this part for the conclusion of it. And I think the film's great, absolutely brilliant.
It was. I would be watching it again. It's one of those. I remember seeing it as a child. I would watch that again now. Fabulous film.
Also, the writers did their research because you could tell that there was a lot of they've been to a lot of they've read a lot about ghost hunting and paranormal investigations of haunted houses. What I found interesting that was the Belasco Mansion was built only in 1919, so it wasn't super old. 1919 is an interesting year, the Thule Society and all that, but it was only when they were supposed to be there in 73. It was only 50 or so years old, so it wasn't even an ancient house, even though it had been built in that kind of like Gothic revival style. But at the end, you find out that there is an energy force. I won't give you the spoiler. An energy force that is actually using the house almost like an amplifier. And the scientist is right, but it's deeper than that. It goes a little bit deeper and ultimately shows that there's survival after death, but sometimes it can be in the form of an entity.
I found another side to it, and that was they shouldn't really have gone in there snooping for the money. If they'd have just left it alone, it wasn't doing anybody any harm. It was in its own place, in its own house, and it was quite happy there. So they went in there snooping around.
I also didn't understand. Yeah, well, the walls had been bricked up and everything been bricked up. So they went in for money and ego. And why did he expose his wife to such great danger? I found that quite difficult to understand. But then again, he did have an ego. We do find out that there's problems in their marriage, and it comes out in a very unfortunate way that embarrasses the man. And so there was probably an element of that. His manhood was threatened, and he wanted his wife, his beautiful wife, to see him. That although he's like, doesn't fulfill her needs in some ways, in other ways he's very he can be manly and in control. I think there's a lot of that. Very Freudian. There was a lot of Freudian stuff, and if it's definitely a lot of that and Jungianism. There's a lot of analytical psychology laced out through all the story and the characters.
It was based on a book, I think, as well. And apparently the book goes into a lot more detail on the sexual side of it and that aspect and the sadistic side. But they didn't bring it through in the film. They just gave you enough to put it in your own imagination as to what debauchery had been going on there and what it was trying to stir up again with the people that had gone to investigate.
That's interesting how they showed how that sadomasochism was a kind of psychic energy force that had a power of its own. And I guess there's even a part where there's a bit of sex magic in it as well, when the Miss Tanner invites the entity to be with her, that kind of thing. And I think she thought she was helping the young boy who had died a virgin, but in reality it didn't turn out to be that at all. In fact, she screams, and they talk about that his previous wife had laid eyes upon him, Belasco, and said he had the face of a demon.
Now, that scene actually shocked me because that character was very prim and proper all the way through the film. So for her to just disrobe and say that and lie down and do that, I thought, wow, that's because she was walking around, very virtuous and religious with her crucifixes on.
And quoting Bible verse constantly. And then she turns into a bit of a nympho.
Yeah.
But the same thing happens with the wife. She sees these phantoms of a sexual orgy on the ceiling, and it possesses her. So again, the Freudian thing, this Belasco's entity knew what made them all tick like a demon, more like a demon than a ghost, and got into them and played with their heads.
So now we come to our main topic of this week, and that is Padre Pio. Padre Pio was born in 1887 as Francesco Forgione, a Franciscan Capuchin friar and priest. And Francesco claimed that he knew at age 5 he wanted to dedicate his whole life to God. Now, his parents were said to be peasant farmers, although his father did manage to travel to America for work in order to pay for private tutoring for Francesco so that he could become educated highly enough to enter the Capuchin order. He said as a youth, he regularly experienced heavenly visions and religious ecstasies, and he became famous for showing stigmata, which created a lot of interest and a lot of controversy. He was known as a mystic, and people close to him claim that he began to show several spiritual gifts such as healing and bilocation, levitation, prophecy, miracles, and abstinence from sleep and food. It was also reported that wounds from his stigmata had this pleasant smell of perfume and flowers. He's venerated as a saint, and his saint's day is the 23rd of September. And the sanctuary of St. Pio of Pietrelcina in San Giovanni Rotondo in the province of Foggia in Italy. To this day, there are over 3,000 Padre Pio prayer groups worldwide with over 3 million members, and his stigmata became an area of controversy. A lady in a pharmacy came forward and said that Padre Pio would go in there in secret to obtain caustic acid and that she wasn't to tell anybody. And in 1925, when the Holy Office got involved and investigated the wounds, they saw as its cause that of a corrosive substance. Now, the Vatican imposed severe sanctions on Pio in the early 1920s to reduce publicity about him, and they stopped him from saying Mass in public, and they stopped him from blessing people and answering letters, and he wasn't allowed to show his stigmata publicly, and he wasn't allowed to communicate with his spiritual director. And they wanted Pio to relocate to another convent in northern Italy, but the local people threatened to riot, and so the Vatican had to leave him where he was. Now, from 1921 to 1922, he was prevented from publicly performing his priestly duties, such as hearing confessions and saying Mass. And from 1924 to 1931, the Holy See made statements denying that the events in Pio's life were due to any divine cause. Padre Pio was alleged to have been a womanizer, and a Father Carlo Maccari, who was the Secretary General of the Diocese of Rome, met with Pio many times, and he said, "Reticence, narrowness of mind, and lies, these are the weapons that Pio uses to evade my questions, and my overall impression of him is pitiful." And Maccari demanded Father Pio's admission to practice kissing after the confession with the lay sisters. Maccari wrote a report on all of this, and in it he gave the names of women who revealed to have been the lover of Pio. And Maccari thought that Pio was a fanatic whose religious conceptions bordered between magic and superstition. Now, Pio was a strong proponent of weekly confession, and he described it as a soul's bath. And Pio established 5 rules for spiritual growth, which included this weekly confession, daily communion, spiritual reading, meditation, and frequent examination of one's conscience. Which makes me think, was he projecting his own guilt of what he'd been doing and absolving himself by telling other people that they must go to confession and they must stop and think and look at their own conscience? Was he referring to himself, or was there some divine intervention at play with him?
Well, the story is full of contradictions. Well, who's after who here? We know that the church can be very wicked, and bishops and popes can be jealous of lay priests who become very successful because it takes the spotlight off them. We've had situations of that in the past where priests who were like local superstars were moved out of the parish because they were making the bishop look bad. He wasn't a big shot anymore. So there's elements of that. There's also elements of that there's independent witnesses for some of the miracles. The most famous being when the U.S. Air Force bombers were going to bomb the town that he was in. He appeared in front of the bombers, and the pilots said that they saw him in front of the bomber floating in midair, and then they turned the plane around and didn't bomb the town. So, I mean, how do you explain that one? Also, the devotion of the locals to him was remarkable. It was like they really idolized him. Now, did he burn his fingers with the caustic soda? I don't know. I just don't know. Could that person, who's the woman that said that, be a woman who was jealous, a woman who was anything? Regarding being a womanizer, there's no illegitimate children we've heard of. So that's another one that, a womanizer back then was someone who just loved the ladies, that kind of thing. Didn't have never necessarily have to be around them. He could have had a female coterie that worshipped him, because he was kind of interesting looking. He looked kind of like an actor and stuff like that. He was quite photogenic. So there's a lot of things that the church wouldn't have liked. Also, his cult is gigantic. Well, it was bigger even 20 years ago. I remember like 20 years ago, the Padre Pio cult was like enormous. You'd constantly see car stickers with Padre Pio on them, and people building houses and name them Pio House and Casa Pio and all this kind of thing. And so it was, he's massive. And the people who do kind of venerate him, no matter what they hear about him, they can do no wrong in their eyes. And there's been lots of sort of like visions of him, post-mortal visions, and lots of healings attributed to his power force. So he isn't, I think he was probably a shamanic magician, etc. on some level. He was just doing it inside the church. And I really don't know what to make of him, except that like the reports are staggering. Like the ones of levitation was witnessed by several people. It wasn't just like he said he levitated. There was people saw him rise up 10 feet into the air and float. I mean, how would he have done that? And it's very condescending to say, oh, they were just like poor Italian peasants who could be easily fooled. No, they wouldn't have been easily fooled. They would have known that he was a gangster or not. So, yeah, a fascinating story, a fascinating character. But even more interesting is that this cult around him, it's just colossal. And he's, even to this day, so many people absolutely love him.
He's got as big a following as Saint Francis of Assisi, I think, and that's a big. When you go to Assisi in Italy, that's a full of devotees and followers. He's as big as that. Yeah, definitely.
But he's definitely boycotted by the church, because if you go to any Catholic church, there's nothing on him. You don't see any Padre Pio mass cards or anything. But if you go into religious shops like Catholic, where they sell holy water and all that stuff, all that nonsense, there's next to the Virgin. If you go to a Marian shrine, next to the Virgin Mary, all the merchandise is Padre Pio. He's like probably like the biggest thing in Catholicism next to like God.
I don't know. The jury's out. I don't know whether he's got some kind of mystical powers, shamanic, like you say. He was a very psychic man who could, do this phenomena. I don't know.
I live not from far from a Marian shrine, and where the Virgin Mary is supposed to appear, back in the 1840s or whatever, and that attracts pilgrims, huge numbers of them from all over the world. And you'll see as many of them carrying mass cards of Padre Pio as you do the Virgin Mary. I mean, it's just staggering how big he is. Any kind of attempt the Catholic Church have made to shut him down, it's completely failed. But I don't know either. But the only one that sticks out in my mind is the appearing in front of the aircraft. That's the one that and the levitation. That's magic, that's it, How do you explain that one,
Yeah, he's said to have cured the actor called Robert Davey, who starred in The Goonies and Die Hard. Not sure what was wrong with him. It just says it was a mystery illness. And his mum and family got in touch with Padre Pio in San Giovanni. they think, well, just some kind of a miracle is all that was said, was performed, and his life has never been the same since. And now this actor, Davy, says that he donates large amounts of money to the Padre Pio Foundation.
Oh, yes,
An ambassador for it.
Yeah, a lot of people will tell you that there's been like lots of terminal illnesses have been cured by veneration of Padre Pio. That even his actual power forces in his name has tremendous magical power within the context of the Catholic Church, of course, like miracles. But it's one of these things that you either believe it or you don't believe it, and then there's us who don't know, and we're in a small minority because it's like I don't think there's any Christian faith cult that I've seen and that even comes close to his. It's absolute. I wouldn't say it's fanatical. That would be wrong to call it fanatical. It's genuine love. They love him. It's just endless amounts of love, and it's very sweet and harmless. There's nothing nasty about it, or there's nothing dark about it. But it's not a fanatical cult in that sense. It's a genuine veneration of absolute love for the man, which I find, you have to have had something to generate that kind of charisma, even after you died.
When you look at the photographs of him, he has got a very beautiful face.
Oh, yeah.
Very intense eyes. You can't help but admire when you look at him. He's got a look of a young Sean Connery.
Yeah, he has that kind of like that Italian look. You're getting like Goya paintings, and Goya was Spanish, but when Goya painted like Francis of Assisi and people like that, there's this kind of intensity that you get. Yeah, oh, absolutely. He was really good looking. He looked like a film star.
He did, because when I was doing research, even I looked at him and thought, wow, look at him. You can't help but look into his face and think, whoa, he's very charismatic.
Is it any wonder the women all went crazy for him?
He was a woman. If he was a womanizer, he was a womanizer as long as it was consensual. He was a Latin lover. He was Italian. So yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing for me. I don't care about their private lives. I know they had taken the oath of celibacy and stuff like that, but once it's consensual, when you think of all the other scandals in the Catholic Church we've had over the years, being a womanizer is probably the least bad one.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And he said, also reading about him, he's cured a few cases of cancer as well. There was a little boy called Lazarus, and he went through months of surgery and treatment and chemotherapy, and nothing was making any difference. And the mother said she made a promise to Padre Pio, and she said that asked for his eternal protection, and if he did that, she'd donate a beautiful image of him to the Ways Noviati. She made that promise in 2017, and then the picture in January 2017, and then the picture of the saint was put in place in September of the same year. And as soon as that picture was put in place, the cancer had gone, and it's not been back since.
Wow. What can you say to that, really? More than mind over matter, there's something else going on there.
Yeah.
So if any of you out there are Catholic, or you're involved in the veneration of Padre Pio, or you have a grandmother, or your mother, or your sister, your aunt, or someone like that, women love him, and you have any stories about Padre Pio or any feelings about it, don't be afraid to share it in the comments.
Today I'm on Monk's Road in Glossop to reach the basin of Coombs Rocks. Local folklore says a great battle took place here between the Roman armies and the native Britons. The wardens of this peak national park have received many reports from ramblers in the area who've cited ghostly legionnaires marching on Bleaklow. Sometimes whole legions of them have been seen, and the witnesses have been able to describe in detail the weapons and protective clothing of the soldiers. The legend goes that around 79 AD, the Emperor Claudius sent over an army and started a war with an ancient British tribe called the Brigantines. The Brigantines inhabited Lancashire, Yorkshire and other neighbouring northern counties. Their boundaries ended within the north of the Longondale Valley. There was also another ancient tribe called the Cornavi, and they inhabited the south part of Cheshire and several other counties south of the Brigantines' boundary. Before the battle commenced, Druids sacrificed the chieftain's daughter Nesta in the hope of winning favour with their gods. The two tribes came together to oppose the Romans, but they were conquered by Julius Agricola, who took possession of Cheshire and overcome the inhabitants of Longondale. They gathered their forces on Coombs Rocks, but the Romans outmanoeuvred them by enticing them onto nearby Ludworth Moor, and the Britons were slaughtered and thrown into the fields below. When the battle ended, the dead were buried in two groups upon the field at the foot of these rocks. Also in the area of Coombs Rocks, there are several relics of antiquity which are classed as Druidicial. One is the two upright pillars rising from a stone base on Ludworth Moor. It is locally known as Robin Hood's picking rods because Robin Hood and his men are said to have used it as target practice, but tradition states it to have been used by Druids as an altar of sacrifice. At certain seasons of the year, when the moonlight falls upon Coombs Rocks, the ghosts of the ancient heroes gather on the battlefields, waving their axes as though ready and waiting for the coming Roman soldiers. They keep eternal vigil over the wild land of Longondale that they loved of old. This is Sara Mondaini reporting for Hocus Focus at Coombs Rocks, Glossop, England.
And now we're at this part of the show where are you clean inside as you are outside? Is your soul well scrubbed? Is your nervous system polished with some kind of cosmic brasso? Here's Sarah with the psychic hygiene.
Okay, so this week I want to present some simple protection techniques that you can use in all kinds of everyday situations. You may find them useful if you're in the sights of an energy vampire or someone who is being actively hostile to you, such as an office bully or someone who likes to make you feel inferior when you're talking to them or they're around you. And I learnt the following suggestions from reading Dion Fortune's excellent book, Psychic Defense. It's a book which I think is essential to understanding the importance of good psychic hygiene and protection. That was a happy accident, that. The first technique is if you have to associate with people who distress you, then imagine that you're separated from them by a brick wall and say to yourself, I can't see you, I can't hear you, and you don't exist. And then go about your business as though they're not there. It takes a bit of practice and it may seem strange at first, but just focus on the intent and eventually you'll find it easy to put that brick wall up whenever it's needed. And when you've mastered it, it's really amusing to look through the wall and see the person that you're keeping out. And you'll see them feeling something that they can't quite understand or put the finger on. And eventually they'll move on to bother somebody else. And you'll find that they probably don't even acknowledge you after a while, and you'll become almost like a stranger to them. Now, the second technique is for if anyone tries to dominate or manipulate you by staring into the eyes. Don't try to stare them out and don't look away. Instead, just calmly look at the spot just above the nose and between the eyebrows. And it's really important to stay calm. And for the most time, you're going to be dealing with just an ordinary bully. And this act should be enough for you to gain the upper hand or bring about a stalemate where the antagonizer will eventually grow tired of his attempt to dominate you through eye contact. And that'll give you a chance to get away from the situation. And with this technique, it's important to note not to go doing this with strangers on the street where you could put yourself in real physical danger. I'm talking about using this with people that you know when you try to dominate or bully you through eye contact, people you come into contact with in everyday situations, such as at work, or dealing with people in authority or bad customer service, gaslighters and that type of thing. So use your discretion with it. And that's my psychic hygiene tip for this week.
That's a great synchronicity there, Sarah, and which we'll find out later in the show. But I agree with everything you said. I've been a great proponent of psychic defense and building consciousness firewalls around yourself, as everyone knows. And ultimately, I think it's the first, before you actually go into learn anything, any kind of occult, new age, any kind of spiritual thing, I think you really have to have your psychic firewall up before you dive in. It's almost like if you go in without it, it's like driving a motorcycle at high speed without a crash helmet.
Defenses up, shields up all the time. And be careful who you let them down for. And now we come to our third topic this evening, and that is the mystique of the vampire. And as you know, vampires are mythological beings who roam the world at night, searching for people to feed on their blood. Most people associate them with Count Dracula from Bram Stoker's novel. The history of vampires began long before Stoker was born. There are many different characteristics of vampires, and they have fangs, drink human blood, they can't see themselves in the mirror, they can be warded off with garlic or killed with a stake through the heart. Some, like Dracula, are aristocrats who live in castles. They hunt at night because sunlight weakens their powers, and some may have the ability to morph into a bat or a wolf. They have super strength, and they often have a hypnotic effect on their victims. The beginning of the romantic vampire genre is The Vampire, written by John Polidori in 1816. But it was probably Bram Stoker who fixed the current view of vampires into popular culture today. However, the first ever vampire was said to be told of in an ancient Greek story, and it's about a man called Ambrogio, who was an Italian adventurer who travelled to Delphi in Greece, and he fell in love with a woman named Selene, who was attending Apollo's temple. And that made Apollo angry, so he curses the man so that his skin would burn if he ever touched sunlight again. And Ambrogio's bad luck followed when he ended up gambling away his soul to Hades, the god of the underworld. And the next curse came via Apollo's sister Artemis, the goddess of the moon and hunting, who made it so that Ambrogio's skin would burn if he ever touched silver. And then a blessing came along when Artemis took pity on the young man and gave him the gift of immortality. Although he'd still have to carry his curses of his skin burning by sunlight or silver, he would live forever in his current form. Ambrogio later moved back to Italy now as a fully fledged vampire, and legend has traced him back to the city of Florence, where he created the first vampire clan, which was made up of humans who were willing to trade their souls for power and immortality.
Within Irish folklore, there's also a vampire fairy called the Slawera, and it's usually a female, and she lives off the blood of livestock and humans, and sometimes she appears as a beautiful human and makes a man fall in love with her but drinks his blood. Very similar to the Lian and She, but there's actually, rather than taking psychic energy, she literally takes blood. Bram Stoker probably got a lot, what he did, get a lot of the archetypes around the vampire story from Irish folklore. His mother lived up here in Sligo, was from here up in Sligo. And he was also involved in the Golden Dawn and heavily involved in folklore and circles. He was quite close friends with Oscar Wilde's mother, Lady Wilde, and her husband, and they were both mad folklorists and tremendous archivists of folklore. So he rebranded a lot of that into the kind of Eastern European Romanian story because he wanted something, I guess, more mystique to it, and the kind of thing of Jonathan Harper being summoned over to Romania, Transylvania, in order to sell property to Count Dracula in England. That kind of creates a very powerful transformative thing, because even in the book he talks about going over the Danube felt like going into another world, into another reality. It felt like it wasn't just east to west, it was west to east, it was into another state of existence. Funny enough, no movie has ever been made that's faithful to the novel of Dracula as was written by Stoker. And Christopher Lee said, who played Dracula in so many Hammer films, said that the only time he would have ever come back is if a director had have offered him a script based on the film, on the novel, precisely the novel is told. The most popular version of the film, probably for most people, is the Gary Oldman version, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, which also includes Winona Ryder. An actually beautiful film, beautiful looking film, and very much plays on the mythological, folkloric aspects of it. I really like the way that film is made and how it tells the story, but it's still nothing like the novel, nothing at all. Well, it is, but I mean, it dips into it. Just about everyone has been a pastiche. Now, there's also another, not just Bram Stoker, there's another Irish vampire writer who preceded him called Sheridan Le Fanu, no relation. And he wrote the very first proper novel, which was called The Vampire Lovers, and also one of the first true Gothic novels written as well. And he's buried in a graveyard in Dublin called Mount Jerome, which has to be seen to be believed. It's straight out of a a vampire movie itself, and with all its Freemasonic temples and everything inside the graveyard, and all the strange mausoleums, and also lots of statues of Lucifer over graves. And we all know the story of Vlad the Impaler. That was basically based on that. And then that was great how they stitched the two in to the Gary Oldman story with Francis Ford Coppola version. That the scene where he stabs the cross with the sword that bleeds is just fantastic. But there's the vampire's tale has been told so many times in many different ways, and people have a famous sort of movie vampire that they love, and it's often like someone who's good looking, like it's charismatic, like Frank Langella or Gary Oldman or Christopher Lee. Not so much Bela Lugosi. He was not really that good looking, but he did invent that kind of archetype for the stage. However, I like the raw, terrifying, spooky vampires. Nosferatu, which I believe is being remade this year, and especially my favorite of all vampire movies, although it's really technically a mini-series, Salem's Lot, based on a Stephen King novel. That absolutely scared the bejeebus out of me when I was a kid. And again, he, like the first story of the movie we did tonight, the Legend of Hell House, he focuses the power of the vampire around the Marsden home, which is a home belonging to a child serial killer. And that's being used to resurrect a vampire in the Salem's Lot movie. And so this kind of fused the both ideas together. And that's a fantastic film with David Soul. Sadly, the kid who was in that film died recently. He's an adult now, but he died recently. But the vampire legacy, I think, affects different people in different ways. I think some people are genuinely terrified of vampires. And I think when women are genuinely terrified of vampires, I think there's a sexual repression there. But when there's women who are absolutely intoxicated and love vampires, the whole goth movement is so hugely into that. There's kind of a sexual liberation there. So for a fictional thing that's really only a product of, literature, it has become so real in that it's almost could have been through it. It's almost like I believe that the Count Dracula, as he was described in the vampire novel, really did exist in that style. That there were people like that there were, and we do hear stories of blood drinking aristocrats like, Bathroy, and that people like that. But also you hear stories that come into later days of like blood drinking cults and things like this. So, and that was kind of shown very well in that film Interview with a Vampire, the Tom Cruise one. I thought that was quite a good one as well. And the book was a great read also. The vampire is like one of these motifs that, based on that little fragment novelette by Polidori, has created this phenomenal body of folklore that still continues to go on.
Do you think that at some point over the years they may possibly exist?
Well, like I said, there is folklore like the Slough Weir, and there are animals like the vampire bat, lampreys, and other animals that live exclusively on sucking blood off living things. Human blood is highly nutritious, so it is possible that there were people who could have done that. I mean, there's every so often you get these edgelords over the years, like think they're gods and stuff like that who drink the blood. But it's also a very dangerous thing to do because it's like very risky if you get the wrong blood type and everything. For instance, the when you get a blood transfusion, they have to put you asleep because there's two life forces battling inside you. This is the power of blood is like much more than hemoglobin. There's something else going on there, big time, and cells. So I think that's one of the reasons why is because we don't. That could probably be this segment we're doing could just as easily be called the occult or the esoteric or the Fortean of human blood, because I think that's really what perpetuates the Dracula story and keeps it going, is that it's almost like the nearest thing we have in our mythology and folklore to connect us to the spiritual archetypal force of our blood.
Yeah, and the blood is literally the spiritual life force that flows through us, isn't it? It's sacred.
Yeah. I mean, and then you have the kind of inversion of the kind of like the Catholic Mass, the transubstantiation, that would have been kind of powerful symbolism to people in who first became aware of the holy blood of the martyrs and all this. You had even in the Nazi occult, we had that last week talking about a thing called the blood banner, which was the blood of the people who were shot at the Munich beer hall push in 1919 or 1918, whatever it was, and Hitler, 1921, I think it was, and Hitler, and they dipped the banner in the blood of the people who were shot, and every SS banner was touched against the blood banner in order to give it magical power. Oh yeah, and they would have all the regimental banners and the SA banners, and they'd have a ritual every year. The Nazis would touch every banner with the blood banner to sanctify it. See, that's why that's why the Nazis made a big deal about blood and the occult of blood, But apart from Catholicism, we don't have a mythology as such in the West surrounding the spiritual nature of blood. And is that what Bram Stoker tapped into? I think he did. I think that's an undercurrent of appeal in those stories. It's like, why does he want the blood? Why does it give him immortality? Why does the blood resurrect him? It's been done so well in so many Hammer films. Why did women become sexual blood slaves of him? There's also that power over women that he has. And yeah. So, I mean, the vampire story will never leave us. It'll be here forever. Well, it's a great example of a modern folklore that's become our folklore.
Yeah, and will continue for generations to come. Back in the old days, when we was talking the other week about 1816, and we were talking about people being buried alive because they had cholera. Well, in some cases, because those people woke up because they were in a coma, they were accused of being vampires, and that they'd have a stake drove through their heart, even though they were just human beings who'd been in a deep coma due to illness.
Yeah, they occasionally find coffins around that have people with a stake through the heart, pinning them to the ground to make sure they're definitely dead. And that's where that came from. Yeah.
Yeah, things like that, and decapitation and stuff. And all this because when people die, when people do die, the natural thing is that your teeth and your hair, when your gums recede and your hair still grows and your fingernails still grow. So it just reinforced this superstitious belief that these corpses were still alive after they died.
It's never been fully explained to me why garlic is dangerous to the vampire. I know but then again, garlic is known as, in recent times, they know that it does thin the blood and clean and purify the blood. So maybe that was what Bram Stoker was tapping into, that garlic could actually kill the vampire blood because it was impure completely. And also thorn bushes and running water and a silver bullet could kill him.
Yeah.
And they used all them in the Dracula films, as well as the stake. But he could be resurrected too as well if his ashes were picked up and blood is spilled upon them. That's what gave Hammer that endless franchise for all during the 60s and into the early 70s.
There was another characteristic, wasn't there? They couldn't travel unless they had the earth from their own grave in the coffin with them.
Their home soil, yeah.
The home soil, was it? Right.
Yeah. And then you think of like blood being associated with like how race and ethnicity and roots and stuff. It probably was to compensate for that.
And didn't Dracula supposedly come to this country as well? Was it
In the novel, he arrives in Whitby in
Whitby?
Yorkshire. Yeah, he arrives in Whitby in Yorkshire, and so he shapeshifts as a wolf and runs through the countryside. So it ties in with that kind of shapeshifting. He's being a shapeshifter. He could be a bat or a wolf.
Right, that ties in with the bar guest as well. That's spotted a lot in the north of England, doesn't it?
Yeah, and also shapeshifters are so common in so much folklore. And vampire. I mean, there's even the film, The Space Vampires. The Colin Wilson, actually was called Life Force, but it was called The Space Vampires in the novel by Colin Wilson. Shows even the science fiction, but that's what he summarized in his book, that the vampires were actually aliens. And that's the vampires of legend were aliens that arrived every so often in a spaceship to harvest the life force of humans. And I suggest people watch that film, Life Force. It's very, very good. And read the novel, The Space Vampires by Colin Wilson. It just goes to show you that the vampire thing is endless. Endless.
If they say the vampires are from aliens from space or from another dimension or whatever, and they're obsessed with the blood and the sanctity of the blood, and then we look at what's happening now, and we and the octopus and the calamari in the veins, it would seem that these extraterrestrial entities seem to be obsessed with our blood one way or the other.
Well, that's funny enough. Apparently, the book, The Space Vampires, written by Colin Wilson, came to him in a dream, and all of Lovecraft's stories came to him in dreams too. And so there's a similarity there. It wasn't based on something he picked up or read or came up with an idea. The concept of the space vampires, Colin Wilson came into his head. And even in the film Life Force, they arrive on a spaceship that looks just like the illustration of that thing of Uma Uma that appeared in 2016 that came from another galaxy or outside the solar system from a different direction, from the wrong direction, I should say. And then they made a right-hand turn. And so, I mean, yeah, I was all during that with the recent stuff that went on since 2020. I kept thinking back to that film, Life Force. In fact, when the movie came out in the 80s, it was commonly connected to AIDS. It's funny how it was wrapped around AIDS back then, that to stop contamination. But yeah, that's exactly. I remember like one of the sort of like rationalizations wasn't only Lovecraft, but it was also Colin Wilson's The Space Vampires during the last 3 years. So yeah, you're right about that. So that's vampires, and we put a stake through this story, Sarah. Thank you.
Hey, it's that time of the week now where we head over to Thomas Sheridan for this week's psychic weather.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Psychic Weather Report. Last week, I spoke about Thor being a very strong archetypal force in the world right now and still remains so. However, there's an element of discomfort and disruption within the zeitgeist. It became apparent over last weekend. There was a sense of things weren't quite right. And this happens now and again. And this is not an unusual thing. It's not necessarily terrible or anything like that, but a sense of general prevailing unease, almost like reality outside your home has a sense of hostility to it. And I would suggest not venturing out too much at the moment if you're that way sensitively inclined to other people at the moment. I'm finding that myself. Now, you could have that as a result of things breaking down in society at the moment. There's definitely a tremendous amount of change going on. But I've been feeling, along with the power force of Thor, an element of unease, a slight unease showed up. And I feel cold. There's an element of cold, like I mean psychic cold, not temperature cold. And I find it being difficult to create. I found creativity very, very difficult in these situations. So it could be a situation where we have the Thor energy coming in, and the pathological powers that be who run this world are probably Renfielding behind the scene. And the Renfielding behind the scene at the greater level is ultimately always directed as pathological intrusions upon us and our lives. So it may even be an indication of something nasty they're going to pull soon. I'm not saying it is, so don't assume that's going to happen. But this a sense of unease comes with things like you get colds and they won't go away. You find digestion is not good. You don't have good digestion, not just you, your pets as well. You will find it doesn't help your sleep cycles and you're tired an awful lot. I would say during this period, stay away, especially from alcohol. Alcohol tends to make things worse when you have this sense of unease in the psychic weather. It just does. You can't even drink yourself out of it. You just feel worse no matter what you do. So try to avoid alcohol. So that's the psychic weather this week. Nothing wildly traumatic. Something a sense of unease out there. It may affect you. It may not affect you. If it does affect you, then be vigilant and take care of yourself, and don't drink too much, and don't put yourself in situations where people might agitate you further, because there's already that little bubble of irritation going on there. And that's the psychic weather this week.
Thank you, Thomas. I can relate to all of that. Colds, have a cold now, a bit like yourself. Waking up in the night for no reason, strange dreams, just feeling uncomfortable, and just noticing little bits of Renfielding here and there, and just having to turn a blind eye to it.
I have digestion problems during these things. I find that I don't like food. I don't really like anything. I could have something that I really love, like a beautifully made pizza, and I still don't want it. I find I'm like, my taste buds seem to be like, whatever, that kind of thing. But it goes like everything else. It goes. Well, this week's book review for me, it kind of became spoiled with Sarah's psychic hygiene report, but that's okay because it's just a beautiful synchronicity and shows us a power in the book that I picked, and I picked it for a reason. And that's Dion Fortune's book on psychic self-defense. I bet lots of you have read this book anyway. It's all over the world. Wherever I go, I see this book. It must be an enormous seller. And I read this, God knows how many years ago. And I revisited it again recently after visiting Dion Fortune's grave in Glastonbury, which I found quite an interesting experience with Neil MacDonald. The video is on his channel if you want to find it. And the Psychic Self-Defense book by Dion Fortune was a huge influence for me in writing my own books on psychopathy, because a lot of the techniques in here were applicable also to pathological individuals in the workplace and so on. In fact, the no contact ever again thing kind of is philosophical, even though I got that from something else. It is sort of like entrenched in this in a certain way. Sarah had mentioned in the psychic hygiene report about if people are trying to get you with their eyes. That's called fascination. And that fascination is when a person stares into your eyes, because the reason they do that, another theme tonight, is because the blood vessels in the eye is where the blood comes to the surface. The only part of your body where your blood supply is visible on the surface of the body is in your eyeballs. And with the occult technique of fascination, certain individuals can control you by staring into their eyes, staring into your eyes, affecting that blood and it going into your heart. Dion Fortune tells you how to deal with fascination. Now, this book was written in 1930, and that meant it was written when the English witchcraft laws were still in effect. So this woman took a big risk writing this book, because at that point you had books on the occult were generally written as fictional novels, such as Crowley's Moonchild, and also her own book, My Demon Lover. So that was a way of getting the occult out there, but doing it through fiction, and then having an ending in the novel where Jesus or God wins. But she put herself on the line in 1930 when she put this book out here. She talks about things that must have been quite disturbing back then, such as how you had young men who'd come back from World War One who would have sex with dying men to try and keep themselves immortality in the trenches. She spoke about black occult groups that operated on the other side of Iona Island. Now, these are involved in human sacrifice. So the book is very full. It's not just about psychic self-defense. There's all kinds of interesting essays and sidelines, and it's written with a very useful chapter by chapter index. And the book is a masterpiece. It's a classic. And a lot of, like, so many books have been based upon psychic self-defense by Dion Fortune. I can't recommend it enough. And again, buy the hardback cover. Don't be downloading things. There's something ritualistically special about turning the page. The page is sacred. So, psychic self-defense, Dion Fortune.
Thank you. Yes, it's a fabulous book. I love it. I use it as a manual. Just open it up and read it, reread it. It's invaluable. It's a very important book. And my book this week, with you saying don't download it, unfortunately, I've had to bring the Kindle edition today, so don't shout. It's Strange Conflict by Dennis Wheatley. You can see that there. And this is a great book. This was recommended to me by my dad and by yourself as well. So I read this and I really, really enjoyed it. And it's a story set in World War II when the bombs start to fall on London. And there's an elderly Duke de Richelieu. Have I pronounced that right, Thomas?
Richelieu.
And he's forced to consider an urgent problem because the Germans seem to be getting some intel somehow and nobody knows how. So they have to find out what methods these Germans are using to discover the secret routes of Atlantic convoys. And there's a character called Sir Pellinor, and he's shocked at the Duke's statement as to how the Nazis are discovering the routes of these ships' convoys and what they're doing. And the loss of supplies is wreaking havoc in vital commodities, and this Pellinor is desperate to try anything to put a stop to it. So it turns the enemies using supernatural powers and dark magic to spy, and these powers can only be overcome by those who have the knowledge and the courage to join battle on the astral planes. And the Duke and his supporters face the terrifying challenge from the powers of darkness. And it's a really fast-paced adventure and a great book with lots of suspense and action, both on the astral plane and the physical. And as is common with this author, there's so much info put into it and lots of occult lore and historical fact woven in. You don't know what's true and what isn't. It's highly recommended, especially if you're interested in the use of occult tactics used by the Nazis in World War II. And Dennis Wheatley was known as the British master of occult writing, and he sold millions of books from the 1930s. And if you are someone who prefers to listen to your books rather than read them, Christopher Lee narrates this particular title on Audible. I highly recommend it. It's a great book and a good introduction to get into Dennis Wheatley as well.
Yes, I've got, I think, the second edition of it. And it's falling apart now because the pages are like dissolving. But yes, it's like Moonchild by Crowley. It blows the whistle through. It tells you, it educates you through fiction. Again, a lot of it has to do with avoiding the English witchcraft laws. But also, I found like some of the descriptions in it fantastic. Like I can remember there was one part, I haven't read it in a long time, where when they first goes into the astral planes, after he explains what the astral planes are and how you can travel in space and time with outside your body, and how they light up down this room, this operational group. But he's over London during a bombing raid, and he sees the houses on fire after being bombed, and he sees the astral bodies of the departed leaving the building and going and ascending up into the astral planes. There's a battle that takes place on a submarine in the astral plane, and he also, he gives you all these. It's like they give you. You learn about Eastern mysticism. You imagine reading these books back in the day when they came out, right? There was very little that the average layperson knew about things like the occult, Eastern mysticism, yoga, Buddhism, and all these things are covered in Wheatley's books, even like the elements of quantum kind of ideas. And the fact that these books sold in their tens of millions, he's one of the most successful authors in history. He gave an enormous education to ordinary people who thought they were going to be reading him, because he was also known for writing World War II and previous and later spy novels. And here he was writing, so people would pick up the book Strange Conflict, oh, it's another spy novel, and they're learning all about astral bodies, astral projection, the astral plane, and moving through space and time, and all these other kinds of things. Now, I think Strange Conflict is based on some truth. I think you said that last week too, yourself. I think there was definitely something going on there in World War II that was more than just like regular occult. That there was what they call super soldiers today, that they were battling in the astral planes, or tried to at least, or maybe even got there. But you often wonder who won the war in the astral plane. Consider what we're dealing with today. Did the SS and the Third Reich win the astral war, and they lost the earthly war? Something to consider, considering what the last 3 years have been like and what the world is becoming right now.
I just want to add to the book. It's written so matter-of-factly that the Duke de Richelieu is just a lot of the scenes are in him and his team putting the pajamas on and getting into bed in this big circle of salt, going to sleep and fighting a bloody war on the astral planes. It's just written, it's quite comical as well in parts. You got these aristocrats.
It's a shame it's never been made into a movie. It's a shame it's never been made into a movie. And then they sit around afterwards drinking brandies and smoking cigars and talking about what the astral plane was like. I love all that kind of stuff.
And while they're doing that, you've got and the poltergeist was slamming doors and opening cupboards, and it was all just ignore it. It's just, and it'll go away, and then they do another cigar, Jeeves. It was very funny.
Yeah, he was fantastic, Dennis Wheatley. And the fact that he worked for the London Operations Group in World War II, he had a very high security clearance, tells me that we're getting an awful lot of truth buried inside these stories.
Yeah, it's a good book, highly recommended. It was recommended to me by yourself, and my dad as well, and it did not disappoint.
And it begins your Dennis Wheatley addiction, because you're going to want to read them all from this point on.
Yeah. So what do you recommend for number 2 then?
The Irish Witch is a really good one. I haven't read that in years, but I remember enjoying that one. But there's loads of them. But that one I really like. Strange Conflict was great. Oh, The Haunting of... Here's the one for read next. The Haunting of Toby Jug. Right. Okay, everybody. That was episode 6 of Hocus Focus. We're going to be in double numbers soon, Sarah. At this rate, it seems to be happening real quick. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. I hope you got a lot from it. I hope it helped you in your own occult studies, your own entertainment and movies and books and so on. And thank you for all your lovely comments. And it's just been very enjoyable so far. It gets better, actually, Sarah. I think I enjoy myself more now, because now we're like a bit more comfortable with it. But is there anything you'd like to say before we go? Oh, it's on Sarah's channel this week, by the way. Like, subscribe, up, and which you'll know that anyway, because I should be on there, so I'll be on my one next week. But we leapfrog. Even some people have left comments on my video today. Where are the missing episodes? And remember, we leapfrog, hopscotch between each other's channels. So don't forget, subscribe to both, notify both, and I believe you set up a playlist. Have you, Sarah?
I've set up a playlist. It's there, Hocus Focus, and I'm putting all the episodes in there as they air, so you'll be able to have a binge watch and catch up, or rewatch anything that you want to learn about. It's all there. And I think the way it works at the moment is I've got the even numbers and you've got the odd numbers on your channel.
Interesting.
Episode numbers.
Yep.
So yeah.
So there you go, guys. It couldn't be easier to watch it. And share it everywhere, will you? Like, get it out there as many people, because we really do feel we have something that has a gigantic appeal here, and it's something that I think a lot of people need at this time to escape from a lot of crap that goes on in the world.
It's nice to bring something to be a distraction for what's going on, and bring a bit of Fortean knowledge to people, and just something to talk about, and leave any comments and any thoughts and ideas in the comments, because we do like reading them. Maybe not be able to reply to every one of them, but they do all get read and they are appreciated.
And remember, being involved in the Fortean only enriches your life and makes your experience as a human being more delicious. You learn things you didn't know pertaining to all aspects of life, history, art, not just the occult, lots of things. The Fortean makes life more fun, but also more interesting and more experiential, let's put it that way. So good night, everybody. Good night, Sarah, and I'll see you next Sunday night, both of you.
Good night.